Hi guys, my name is Kenzie and welcome to a watercolor tutorial, and today we're going to be painting these wildflowers. I love painting wildflowers. I actually just love painting flowers in general, and this is no exception. So we're going to go over some really loose watercolor florals at first before we dive in, and I show you some tips and tricks of how to move your brush around, how to section it off so it feels less overwhelming, and I hope you guys had as much fun or will have as much fun painting this as I did, and I continually do. I love painting flowers. All right, let's get to it.
Supplies. I have this Dr. Phil Martin's Bleed Proof White. I'm not sure if I'm going to use this. We're going to see how it goes, but I wanted to show you anyway. I do use this a lot in my paintings. I have my 2 water cups right here. I have my cloth. I have my size 12, 4, and 8 paintbrush. My palette right here where I mix my colors. And 2 sheets of paper, because for this tutorial we're going to go over some techniques first, some flowers before we jump into our main piece. So I'm going to set this one aside right now. So if you have 2 sheets of paper, why don't you pull out your scratch real quick, and then we'll just practice some flowers here before again we jump into the main one. I'm going to show you kind of like a filler flower, and it is lavender. So don't worry so much about your colors. We'll focus more on colors later. I'm just going to pull some purple right here, and I'm going to use the very tips of my brush, and I'm going to kind of pretend like there's a triangle right here that I'm going to try to fill. So I'm going to use the very tip of my brush, and then we'll start really, really thin at the top, and you're going to see as I go down, I'm also leaving white space, which is just the paper shining through. It's something that we use in watercolor. I guess it just adds a little bit more depth to it. And I'm just blotting all the way down. So you see how it kind of mimics the shape of the triangle. And if you don't want it to look perfectly like a triangle, you could just add a little bit more blot. So while that's still wet, we can go in. Oh, that's already dry. We can go in and tap around, or even if it's dry, and you'll see here how this just adds a little bit more depth to it. And I'm going to show you actually what it looks like. I'm going to go a little bit faster, and I'm going to show you what happens when it is dry. Sorry, when it's wet. Okay, so when it's wet, this is kind of what it looks like. It'll start to just kind of bleed out. The color just kind of expands. So either way is kind of good, but they will both give you depth to your lavender. So that's the lavender. I pretend, or I try to visualize in my head, that I have a circle, and I always kind of start from the center of my circle and I move around like this. So it's kind of like a wonky C shape. I lift up, and then I go from that point where I just started from my center, going outwards on the opposite direction, and I do that all the way around. So I start from my center where my center would be. I do a mini little C shape. I lift up, and I'm also using light pressure to medium pressure. You'll notice my brush is like at a 45-degree angle. And if I need to, I'll like fill in the middle. And I do that all the way around. Lift up, lift up. So you'll see here that I'm leaving some gaps and spaces. That's what white space is. I'm letting the paper kind of shine through. See how I'm curving my brush, meeting it in the middle. So I don't typically put my centers in. This is just to kind of help give you a visual. I usually just picture and imagine that I already have my circle there, and I do the exact same thing. So start from my middle, lift up, do the other side, lift up, start from my middle, lift up, leaving a gap in white space from my center. My centers are not touching, my sides aren't touching either. Lift up, lift up. You'll also see that my petals are not perfect at all. And then for my centers as well, I'll lift you up more over here. For my centers, I don't completely do a circle and cover it.
I'll tap around and I'll leave white space. So you'll see that my petal here was already wet. That's the wet on wet, so the yellow kind of creeps in, which I'm fine with sometimes, but if you don't want your centers to creep into your petals, you would obviously just dry your petals first so that your centers don't bleed like this. And if you don't like it, you'll see here I'm just scooping up some colors. You can also do that with your petals. You can scoop to give more of like a natural highlight. Or while it's wet, you can tap around and you'll see here that it just kind of bleeds really nicely. And when it dries, it'll give it some nice contrast and depth to the flower.
I use this flower a lot, and I use it in various different ways. I use them for big flowers or little mini ones. There's a few different ways to do the poppy. I do like a really loose shape, kind of like that. You can just kind of wiggle your brush around. There's another way that you can do it as well, is doing a really loose, wonky circle, and then you can tap with your black, and then down here you can tap with the black too. This one had too much water in it, which is why that exploded, so I can just actually lift that with water and it just lifts it up. Or if you want the poppy to be a little bit bigger, like a side profile, so you can do the same shape over here, and then you can come over and do it again on the other side. And then you can touch the bottom. Something like that. And then you can do your stem. I'm just going to mix up a green real quick. I do not like this green. It's way too bright for this flower, but since it's just a practice, I'm not going to get too worried about it. There you go. There's my poppy. So this one's also one of my favorite flowers. I think it's really, really pretty. So I'm going to start off with like an orangey center. And there's a few, I'll show you. So when I do this workshop in person, this is what some people this flower some people struggle with. So I'm going to put my color down. I could see that it was pretty wet, so I just lifted some color with just a damp brush. And while it's wet, I'm going to touch just like the corner ever so slightly so that it bleeds into my center, okay? So while that's still wet, let's use purple because I already have it mixed. I'm going to go in with the very tip of my brush, and I'm going to use light pressure, scoop it down, and then lift up. Scoop it down, lift up. And again, the trick here, my next one, it's Baby's Breath, and I'm going to use blue just because it's kind of tricky to show you any other way. And it's very similar to this lavender, except it's just like a loose dome. So using the very tip of my brush, going around, doing a very loose dome, blotting around. You can even go in and tap around with a darker color as well. And the greenery for this one, you're going to want to let this dry before you put any greenery down, but just for the sake of time, I'll show you. I used little flicks for this. And then you can even go inside. Again, I would do this part when everything is dry, but I'm just going to show you. You can do little flicks on the inside, little flicks at the top. And this is a good filler flower as well. So that's the Baby's Breath. Okay, so another flower that I do that I really like, kind of like the poppies, is a wonky oval shape, but then I also go at the very top and I fill it in with little streaks at the top, coming around the sides. So I will also do this. It's kind of like a bud, like a flower just waiting to bud. I will also do this with my green as well. I think it's really pretty to add this in as green. So I start off with my little wonky oval, and then I can go in just adding some streaks. Then you can add a stem. I use the very tip of my brush for my leaves here. And go in and add a stem to it as well. It's very simple. I like this one though. Okay, so the next one I want to show you guys is one of my favorite. It is a really good filler flower, kind of like the lavender, because they're very tall and they can take up a lot of space. So I'll show you what I do. Again, very wonky shape right here. It does not have to be perfect. And then you have to wait until this one is dry. I'll show you what you can do. Okay, so once the shape is dry, you can go in and you can just add a darker color that you already have mixed and create not a perfect circle, but a wonky shape on the inside. And that's what we're gonna do. Okay, so for this flower, I'm gonna continue this down and I just create these shapes going down and trying to be mindful kind of the same thing as lavender. Want it to be thicker as we get towards the bottom and thinner towards the top, which just means I'm adding more of these bell shapes, a lot more towards the bottom. And you don't have to have it be like a perfect line across. And you'll see here I go pretty quick because again, this is loose watercolors. I don't want it to be perfect. Okay, ideally I let this dry. I can move on to a different piece so I don't have to use my dryer, but because I'm just showing you, I'm going to dry this. I'm going to do the same thing now. I'm going to go in with my center, doing a little wonky dot or circle. And then for the greenery for this one, it's basically just little lines that go in between this, and then I do little lines coming off of the stem to kind of mimic leaves. Going around, filling it with some stems and leaves. At the bottom, you could do some really big leaves. Oh, I missed a bell. And then at the top, you can also just do some greenery using the same technique as the lavender, just kind of blotting around, leaving some white space. So you can just keep filling them. You can also add a little bit more depth to your bell when it's dry. You can kind of go around with the wash of the color that you used and just tap around different parts to it. And it just, again, adds a little bit more depth to your little bell shapes. So I'll show you guys another one that I really like. So this one I want to start with the bud. So this is just a really loose oval. It's going to come down and have a stem. And then we're going to use the very tips of our brush. Ideally this part would be wet so it doesn't bleed too much. And you're just going to do flicks. Here, I'm going to dry this because it's making me uncomfortable. Give me a sec. Okay, so you're gonna do little flicks coming away from your bud, and then you can also tap the bottom to have a little bit of depth to it. And again, you gotta leave white space. White space is key. And then I'll show you one more filler flower. So this one's just kind of a combination of this, the very loose, and I'll show you over here. You're going to create little shapes, kind of are supposed to mimic. Here, let me use a brighter color so you guys can see. I'm supposed to mimic flower, And you'll see how I'm just going to be leaving some white space. And this is just very loose, and it might feel kind of awkward at first because it's just random shapes, really. But when you're completing your piece, it will come together. But I can attest, it does feel awkward at first making shapes that aren't like a perfect flower. And then you can go in and you can create the same thing that we did right here, just some stems and some leaves going all the way up. You can even put some green on the inside here of your flowers. And use a little bit of the tip of your brush at the top as well to kind of extend the green up. Okay, cool. I'm also going to show you guys very quickly some leaf shapes that you can do.
So for the stems, I use the very tip of my brush, trying very hard to do a really thin stem. If you're finding that your stems are super thick like this, it just means you're putting too much pressure. You either can like move up on your brush or just practice over and over again until you're finding that you're getting really light pressure. So for your stems, you're going to use the very tip of your brush to create a really skinny thin line, and then from the bottom you would do the exact same kind of motion that you just did for the petals over and over again. But this time you're going to be touching your stem. You can move up, and you typically want to have your leaves a little bit thicker at the bottom, and then as you get towards the top you want it to taper and thin off and be smaller. But I'm doing that little C motion that we just did for the petals for your leaves. So this is one, and while this is wet, you can also mix up a darker color and do the same thing that we just did here. You could touch different points with a darker color, especially like at the stems as well, where there would already be like a natural shadow. You can do that, or the same thing, you can get a damp brush with just water on it, and you can lift, if it's wet, to kind of create a natural highlight in your leaf as well. So that's a fun little thing that we do.
And for another type of leaf you can do, it's kind of like the drooping leaves. So again, just using the very tips of my brush, applying medium pressure. You can even make these huge. The tips of my brush, medium, lift up. Tips of your brush, medium, lift up towards the center, and you can do these really droopy, but these are fun because you kind of use the edge. So tip, edge, and then you can kind of lift up. That didn't show. So tips, edge, and then you kind of just lift up. That one's a fun one. And then if you ever need kind of like some filler leaves towards the bottom, you can use some of these greens as well, where it just kind of looks like really loose leaves. Okay, so I feel like that's really good. So these are the flowers that we're going to be using over and over and over again to create our watercolor piece. This is what I painted for our workshop before. So we're going to mimic something close to this with the flowers that we just went over and used. When you're first kind of free-handing your flowers and you have a blank piece of paper, it can probably feel pretty overwhelming. I totally get that. So what I've kind of done in the past is I like to show people that you should just work in sections. I usually have a ruler, but I have got no idea where my ruler is, so I'm just going to freehand. So using a pencil, I am going to really lightly, pencil like about 3/4 of my page down, and then I'm going to pencil really lightly again some boxes. So I have 3 boxes, and we're going to work in sections. And I feel like that's easier versus trying to fill up the whole page. What I want you guys to do is have 3 filler flowers. So it can be the same filler flower or it can be a different filler flower, but we're going to do our tall filler flowers first, which could be the lavender, those bell ones that we talked about, or this one right here. So I want to do a bell one first. So I'm actually going to put my bell here in my corner, and I am going to just use a peachy color. So I am going to mix in some pink. I don't actually have any orange in my palette, which seems very strange. So I am going to mix up my own orange right here. I'm going to mix that in. And usually peach has white in it, so I'm going to be sneaky and just add a little bit of white to this. Okay, so using the very tip of my brush again, I'm going to go in and create this filler flower. So I'm going to start more towards the top and then kind of work my way down. And I want to start small. I do not want these flowers to be too big, otherwise it's just going to look a little funky. So starting kind of small, I am going to do my wonky ovals, trying to keep them somewhat close together. I also don't want them to look like they're in perfect lines either. Bringing them all the way down. And I am going to let that dry. I'm going to come over in this section and I'm going to do some lavender. So I'm going to come in and using a wash of purple, I am going to start blotting around. See how I started really thin and my flower is still pretty small? And it's getting a little bit thicker towards the bottom. Okay, and then I am going to leave this. I'm happy with that. And now I'm going to work on this one right here, and I'm going to use this peachy color, but I'm going to add a lot more of my rose color to it, and I'm going to add water to my palette so it's not so pigmented. And I'm going to come in and I'm going to do, I'll show you, I'm going to do this flower right here. Okay, so I'm going to do four petals here. And right here, I just did two kind of off to the side. I'll fill these in. So starting from my center, the most important thing that you can keep in mind with this flower is that you need to leave white space. These flowers are not supposed to look perfect at all. And you'll see here, I even did 3, 1, 2, 3, because I want it to not look like it's face on. It's going to be at the side. So I just left 3 and 2, and then I'll fill in the centers in some green, and it looks really nice. So as I go towards the top, I do want it to start becoming a little bit smaller of a flower. The reason why I'm having you guys do one on each box is because this is going to be your focal point of your piece, and it just kind of helps you kind of stay on track as well. And then I think when we get towards the top, we'll just start shifting and do those little ovals, wonky ovals, and start them smaller so they start to kind of look like they're buds towards the top. And if you see any awkward spacing here, you can go in and add some more petals. So right here, I'm just doing 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. I'm not doing. Okay, so I'm happy with that. Now to kind of pull these together, I'm going to go in and add my depth to some of these while they're wet. And tap around. If they're not wet, they'll just kind of sit there. So you got to blend it out a bit. Yeah, these ones at the top, they're not really wet. And I'm just touching different points. I'm not being too fussy about where. I'm going to go ahead and fill in my wonky circles.
So I'm very much a perfectionist with everything, so these watercolors was so hard for me because I would want to just sit and have every petal look absolutely perfect. But then when I did that, I just felt like it made my piece look even worse. So the more I kind of practiced getting out of my head, being loose with it, I felt like my paintings were a lot better. But I just tried this so I could move on to the next part. And they were just kind of bleeding because they weren't completely dry.
I'm going to come in and just kind of create some buds. So I'm actually not too worried that I'm going to go over my line. I just don't want to do that. Okay, let's mix up some green. I'm going to be mixing my sap green, my darker green, and a little bit of red to my green. I feel like the red gives it a very natural tone to it. Very earthy. Okay, so I'm going to go in now and create my stems in here. So again, just using the very tips of my brush. I'm going to dry this so I'm not smudging all over my shape. And then I'm creating the stems up towards the bottom. I'm going to be doing some loose, those droopy leaves as well. And I'm going to go in and mix some indigo in this green. And I'm going to go in and basically tap around different parts so that it doesn't look very flat. A little bit darker. And the key here is to make sure that you're leaving some of this original green color to shine through. So I'm not completely covering everything I just put down with this darker color. I'm just tapping different points. If you want to, you can go in with the wash and you can touch different parts of your bell-shaped flowers. And it will just give it a little bit more dimension to it. Happy with this one, so I'm going to move on and complete this one. For this flower, I would like there to be an orangey center to him. I'm going to go in with my orange, or with my yellow. So remember how I said that I had some some petals that had 3 petals on it in 2? So with those ones, you just touch where the center would be and then leave it. The exact same thing. Again, it's just supposed to look like the side of the flower and not face on. Just gives it a different angle to it. I love these. They're so pretty and I love to paint them too. They're kind of my go-to flower. Okay, and then I'm going to kind of do a different type of stem here. I'm going to go in and just do some flowers. So you remember these leaves right here that we did together? That's what I'm going to do without the stem. So I'm going to use light pressure, C shape, and then do the exact same thing on the other side. Light pressure, C shape, meet it on the other side. And I'm going to fill in lots of these leaves all over. And if you see any kind of random gapping that you can't really quite fit a leaf in, I just use the very tips of my brush and just kind of dot around it to be a filler greenery. And then towards the top, you can also just do little loose blots. I want to bring down some flowers too. I don't want it to stop or start quite as high. So I'm going to bring some of these flowers down. Let me just try this real quick. I'll do my center. Okay, now I can fill it in with a little bit of green. And if you see any type of spacing you want to fill, I just use the very tips of my brush to kind of go in and fill those. This looks really pretty. I'm really happy with how this turned out. And what you can do to take it one step further is, again, you can mix up a darker color, whether with indigo or some red. That kind of darkens it up, and you can go in with your leaves and you can just kind of tap around, giving the leaves a little bit more of a pop. And when you do this, again, same thing over here, you want to make sure that you're leaving the original green color as well. And see how this just kind of changes the piece just that much more. Doesn't make it look as flat. Gives it some depth. There you go. Alright, so with my purple, I'm going to mix in a little bit of indigo with my purple, and I'm going to tap around different parts of it. Where is it? And I'm actually going to leave this, and I'm going to move on to filling up this one right here, this piece. Actually, no, I'm going to do this side right here. So I'm going to mix up a couple colors right here. So because I already used pink kind of twice, I want to switch and use, excuse me, I'm going to use a little bit of blue. And I'm going to do my droopy flowers right here. And I'm going to do a few of them. I honestly love these flowers so much. I could paint them over and over and over again. Okay, so again, I'm going to start with my bud, which is my dome. While it's wet, I can go in and tap with some red, That looks a little green to me, so I'm going to add a little bit more yellow. I can even just tap that in. Okay, so for my other one, I'm going to add some red to it too. So because I did these kind of close, I'm going to do one at a time. I'm going to dry these. So these are like this is like a bluey purple color. Okay, so same thing as before. I'm actually going to shift my painting around a bit so it can face me. I'm going to go in the very tip of my brush, drag it down, and this is very thin, so I'm going to make it a little bit thicker right here. Very tip of my brush. And I'm going to go and add a few flowers just right here. But I'm not going to make them long. I'm going to make it look like it's kind of angled a bit. I can go in and tap different points of this. I can even go in and lift some color, just a damp brush, so that it's lighter at some points. And there you have this guy, which is so fun. My only problem is I did this one pretty close here. Let me add a little bit of depth to this yellow. I'm going to have to dry this. And then you're going to do the very same thing, and you're going to work around this flower if you did yours like mine, where it's just so close. And I'm going to leave that one. Tap around different points of the purple. Okay, so with my blue, I'm going to go in just to kind of make it pop a little bit more. I'm going to add a little bit more depth to this, so just little lines on it, just because we want it to pop and kind of stand out. And I'm going to do a very mini version of this flower right here, because we want there to be groups of 3. It's more pleasant on our eyes when we consider grouping. So I'm going to kind of use this flower right here, but I'm not going to make it quite as tall. So I want to kind of create a bud. So I'm going to do the oval shape that we had talked about before, and I'm also going to bring it out a little bit because it's a little, those flowers are a little spiky at the bottom. I'm going to bring my stem down, and we'll have it get lost in this because the stem is not the main focus. And I'm going to use a darker color of what we already have. I'm going to add some indigo to it, to my purple-ish color. And I'm going to go in and create my little mini flicks. I'm even going to do some flicks just above it. And then I'm going to mix in a little bit of black to my green that I have, and I'm going to add a bit of depth to this just like that. And then I'm going to grab a stem right here, bring it down, and then I'm going to grab a stem right here, bring it down, and I'm going to have this be kind of crisscross. So this one right here, and then this one right here. And we want to add drooping greenery to these ones for sure. Oops, that's too green. I have to scoop up some of this color because it just doesn't match the stem. I actually really like it how it is. I don't really want to add much more to this, so I'm going to leave this for now, and I'm going to finish off this box. So what I feel like it needs is a little bit of some low coverage right here. So I'm going to add a little bit of I'm trying to think, probably going to add some of these to the bottom, but I'm not going to have them so tall. I'm just going to have them kind of spread out more towards the bottom. Okay, let's do this, and let's add yellow, because yellow is a complementary color of this, so we'll just kind of help. Okay, so I'm going to be doing my little wonky flower shapes towards the bottom. I want it to be a little bit more pigmented. I'm going to add a little bit more yellow. I'm going to tap the centers here with that color. I'm going to go in and do the same. Okay, I'm going to do one more because we want to group with odd numbers. So I have 5 of my drooping flowers. And like we talked about this, how it's kind of like a filler leaf, I kind of want to fill in this awkward gap. So I'm going to dry this. And I'm going to go in and use these kind of filler leaves to fill in the gap that we have down here. And the trick to this one is you want to be rotating around different greens. I'm going to mix in some orange for the center of these. I'm just blotting around the middle or the bottom of these to kind of look like the center of the flower. Now what I want to do is kind of carry this one up just a hair. I'm going to use the very tip of my brush, and I'm going to do some straggly lines here. And I'm going to add a little bit of buds, I guess. And adding some of those wonky, imperfect shapes towards the top right here. I'm going to bring down my green. And I'm gonna add a poppy down towards the bottom because I feel like that will just kind of help break up this awkward spot that we have right here. So I'm gonna go in and make my poppy shapes that we practiced. I'll even have it kind of hide behind this leaf so it looks like this leaf. It's more on top. Probably just stick with these two for now. And then you can add your black to it. And you'll see here, I'm starting to kind of blend now between my boxes. My blocks. Go in and do the stems for these. Just like that. I can do their centers though. We have our connector to this block, which is my poppy. So I'm going to come in here and add a little bit more detail here. And I'm going to have some buds coming from here. So you're going to see how I'm just creating some lines. And that's where I'm going to put my yellow. And I do want to kind of bring some yellow down, even just over here. So it fills in that awkward gap that we have right here. So I'm going to add a little bit of stem. And I think I'm going to add a little bit of yellow even just over here, so it looks like it kind of goes beyond this flower as well. Kind of helps bridge the gap between these flowers. Focusing on this side, I'm going to mix in a little bit of pink and purple so it makes a very pretty violet color. Not violent, violet color. And I'm going to kind of create these loose, kind of like the poppy shapes that we've been doing. They're not going to be poppies. Oh, I'm going to add a little bit of red to this. And I kind of want it to be rigid at the top as well. And I'm just going to do a few of these kind of just floating up, and I want them to be different colors as well. Okay, one last flower that I want to show you guys before we get started. We're going to use the very tip of our brush. We're going to kind of see our way, kind of do a C shape, and then I want you guys to kind of wave your brush. So I'm going to do a C shape, and then wiggle your brush at the top, and then you can even just leave some of the white space, and then you can touch the bottom with some dark color as well. So to do that again, we're going to do the very tip of our brush, bring it up to the top, wiggle around, do it on the other side, wiggle it around. You can even bring it in the center just a bit, but we want it to be kind of a jagged top to it as well. You can even come around the sides and add some petal-like shapes right here. You can touch the bottom with a darker color, and then you can bring your stem, even while it's wet. Oh, let me mix up a little bit of green. You can even touch the bottoms while it's wet and bring it down. I'm going to go in and just touch different points of this so it just has a little bit more depth. It looks a little flat to me. And I'm going to do a bright blue as well. I'm going to do like a little wash of an orange. You can go in and tap the bottoms here. And I can do my stems. And I want these to be kind of skinny stems, so I'm using the very tip of my brush. If you're struggling to have stems that are not thin, you can practice the technique of just using the very tip of your brush. Even hold your brush at the very top and practice just doing soft lines, skinny lines with the tip of your brush on a scratch piece of paper. All right, I'm going to put some loose leaves, maybe some greenery around the base. Gotta fill this up a bit. Just want to add some leaves, some big tall leaves, some greenery. On different spots. Using the very tips of my brush, doing that C-shape motion that we did. I'm actually just going to go right on top of this one right here. Going in and adding a little bit more of a darker color and give it a little bit of a pop. And I'm going to do a small one right here. Doing the C shape. I'm going to add a little bit more blue to this because I feel like there's not a lot of a bluey cool colors in this. And I'm going to tap around that cool blue color. And there you go. Let's add more blue to this. And I'm going to add, I think, some eucalyptus leaves. And it's basically the same as this, except for the C. It's more like an oval shape. And I think I want to put it right on top of these. So using the very tip of my brush, the same that we were doing right here, except for doing the C, we're just doing some really loose oval shapes. Tapping in more of the indigo color while it's still wet. This also kind of helps disguise the green stems that are underneath it as well. So now that I have this in here, I kind of want to introduce this eucalyptus over here. I think having some blue will be really pretty. I want to do them really small. And then you can go in and tap different points. I'll do one over here too. And I'm just using small leaves. So they're just really loose circles. Bringing the stem down. I like it. I like the little blue pop. I think it looks really good. So I feel like I want to have a little bit more florals that come down here and then maybe stop midpoint, and then I'll have some greenery up top right here. So I want to do some flowers down here. So I'm thinking what I might do is actually some baby's breath. And using the very tip of my brush, I'm blotting around. I'm kind of going under these flowers like this. And then I can even add a little bit of indigo to different spots of it. Not much, just a little bit to look like the shadow. I'm going to dry this real quick. And I'm going to add a little bit of green to my stems down here. I'm going wherever I see my white space in my baby's breath. I'm going in, filling it out. I'll just do some really light streaks coming away from it on top. I'll go in and mix a darker color with some cadmium red. And do a couple more streaks around. Okay. Cool. And I'm going to do just some really loose lines right here as well. To kind of look like some grass or some tall weeds or something. Oh, that looks so pretty. Okay, I'm going to move on to this section, and then I'll come around and I'll add a little bit more, but I at least want to finish and focus on this section really quick. So I have my lavender right here, but I don't want to necessarily continue my lavender all the way down. I kind of want to put a flower or something right here to kind of go over top. And what I'm thinking I might do is introduce more of these. I think they're super pretty. So I'm going to go ahead and do a bunch of little ones. And I'm going to work this time one at a time, and I'm going to rotate around different types of colors. So I have my pink. Remembering to use really light pressure to medium pressure, lifting up, light pressure, medium pressure, lifting up. And then while that's still wet, I can tap around my yellow with some red to give it a little bit of pop. All right, next one. I'll even do one down here, I think. I'll do some mini ones as well to make it look like they're kind of in the distance a bit. And I'm just mixing some yellow with some of my rose color. This one's really droopy. Tapping it around in the center. And I'm going to get a little bit of that bright blue that I have right here. And I'm just going to tap different points and just let it naturally bleed. And what's fun about doing groupings and flowers like this as well, because you're sitting here doing them over and over and over again, you'll start to get more confident as well with what you're doing. Okay, I think I'm going to do one more. Just one more right up top right here. Let's do a purple because I don't have any purple on it. Let's mix this rose color with some purple. It's more like a violet. That's really pretty. Tapping just to give it a little bit of shading. Okay, my lower ones are probably dry, so I can go in now and give them some stems. I go in as well and just give it a little bit of greenery around. Just gonna fill up the space, maybe some like loose leaves. So it looks like a bush versus just individual stems. And then we can come up and kind of work on this lavender right here too. And I'm going to try and change out the green that I already have so the green looks different than the green down here. I use a lot of cadmium red down here. I'm going to do a little little stems. Going in and I'm touching my green down here with a different shade. I added a little bit of yellow to it. Just changes it a bit. And then off to the side, what I am going to do, not might, I'm going to add maybe a little bit of lavender off to the side of the page so it looks like there's maybe a few of them that just got cut off by the sheet. And then I'll come in with this green and add my stems, which means, because I have two, for grouping reasons, I'll go in right here and maybe add a small lavender right here so it kind of looks like there's a group of them. Tapping in different purples. Because I already have this green, I can go in and add my stems. Okay, cool. I feel like this corner looks good. I'm just going to dry it so I don't smudge it. So because I have this part right here, I'm going to have to move some flowers up here. So I want to do, I'm thinking like a group of flowers right here, like some tall stemmy ones. And I'm thinking what I'm going to do is I'm going to do maybe a few of these because these look really pretty. So I have a little peachy color right here. And I'm going to go, oh, I can't do that flower because I have these flowers right here. I don't want them too close. No, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to pull these and I'm going to do that right here. That's what I'm going to do. And I don't want to use that peachy color because this looks like a peachy color. So I'm going to go yellow. And now that I can see that I'm moving on, I'm going to grab my eraser really quick. And I'm going to start erasing this line. Because one thing that I've noticed when I've been painting is if you go over these lines, they kind of shine through unless you go like really dark. But because I'm going really airy, you'll be able to see your pencil marks. So I'm not going to paint over them. I'm just going to erase that line. Okay, so moving on, doing the same thing right here. I'm going to do a bunch of these. And I'm going to stick with a yellow. I'm only going to do yellow. Actually, I have yellow right here, so I'm not going to do that. It's kind of, doing these wildflowers is kind of just looking around and seeing what you've already done and trying to change it. And add my stem to them. I'm trying to pull these stems underneath this part right here. Okay, so I guess we're just on to our last section, which is right here. I think I might do is kind of what I've done right here is I might just add some loose stem right here. And I'm going to do kind of what I just did right here, but I'm just going to do it with blue so it looks like a leaf. Just to add a little bit more botanical plant to here. Okay. I'm going to do this flower. And I'm rotating between different shades of purple. And I'm going to try and go small the more I go up. And I want to have bright yellow centers on these. That looks so good. Okay, and I'm going to go in with my stem here for these, trying to cross them so that they look somewhat interconnected and not as awkward. And then I can add some leaves, not a lot, but just some leaves. And with this green, I added a little bit more yellow to it, so it has a more yellowy tone. I love this. Okay, but you'll notice now I have a gap right here of awkward spacing. So now I can go in and separate it with some filler flowers. So a filler flower I'm going to pick is this one right here. So I'm going to throw one of these in. I'm going to use, I think, a bright pink. So I'm going to put in my rose color, and I'm going to do my flicks around in a circle like this. And then I'm going to add my darker color right here, the bottom, tapping it in. And then I'm going to get my green, and I want to mix up a darker green. So I'm going to mix my sap green, my darker green, and with indigo. And I'm going to leave a gap in the middle here. I don't like that green. It's not dark enough. And I'm going to add a couple of them. Kind of going behind the one that we already have, the flower. I'm going to give these more jagged greenery, just like that. I'm going to do a wash of green right there to kind of fill it out and bring it in. And now I have this space right here, which I think I'm going to just do a nice little eucalyptus stem versus a flower. And I'm using just the very tip of my brush. I'm going to add these a few places actually. I'll put one. Right over here. So I'm just kind of looking for don't want to say like random spacing, but just definitely spacing that's a little bit more awkward, or that can use a bit of a fill, like right here could use a little bit of something. And I can go in with either some greenery to kind of fill it out. I'm seeing something that lacks a little bit of depth. I can go in, but I still feel like this is kind of awkward, and I still want to fill it in a little bit more with something. I need to bridge the gap right here. Okay, so to kind of bridge this gap, I could do a few things. I could either add a little bit more greenery, I have a bunch of greenery right here, or I can use my filler flower, which is kind of what I'm thinking I'm going to do. So I'm going to use one of my filler flowers, which is probably going to be my lavender or baby's breath. I already have lavender right here, so I'm thinking I'm going to have a lower baby's breath right here. And it's important for me to use a wash because I want it to kind of look like it's in the distance. So using a lot more water than color. And I'm thinking I'm going to go more, wash of more pink because I feel like I already have a lot of that blue and purple right next to it. So I'm going to mix up a wash. Making it really light, and I'm trying to go behind the stems that I have, making sure I'm still leaving my white space. And I need to go in now and add a little bit more depth to it. So I'm going to tap around different parts of it. I'm going to make it a little bit wider. Go in with my stem. Try not to go too dark. Stems at the bottom. I'm going to add a little bit of brown. Some stems right here. And I want to put something right here as well. I feel like this is a little awkward. So I'm going to go in kind of what I just did right here, but I'm going to use more of a wash, and I'm going to use smaller brush strokes. And I'm kind of going to tower it up. It's more right here towards the sides. I kind of want it leaning a little bit so it's just not so straight up. And I'll do some more over here. Okay. So you'll see I'll tend to do my flowers first versus my stems first, because I'm able to then go in and kind of visualize where I have like any awkward spaces where I feel like if I put my stem first, I'm limited to try to cover the area of the stem. I feel like it's a lot more loose and freeing if I do my flowers first. So I can go in now with my color, with my stems, And then I have a little one right here. I'm mixing cadmium red and some rose in here, doing a wash, and I'm going to go in, just add a little bit more depth to these flowers. I was just too pigmented, so I just wiped my brush to get rid of some of the pigment on it. And I'm just touching different parts of this. I'm going to do the same, this one up here. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with how this has turned out. I can go in now and add some depth to different parts of my piece. It's time to kind of sit back and look at it and decide if you have to fill in any more awkward gaps, if you need to change anything. So I'm not loving that everything else is very muted and then I have this random pop of red. So it makes me want to add a little bit of red over here. So I have a little gap right here, and I think I'm going to do that. I'm going to go small though. I'm not going to go too big. I'm going to add some poppies over here. I'm going to go small so it kind of looks like they're in the distance. And I'm going to rotate between each one of these shapes as well. Try to not have them too jagged either. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm gonna let this dry real quick. Adding my black now. And then I'll add my stems. I missed one. I did this part right here. Okay, I'm glad I did that. But I think with grouping again, 1, 2, what I might do is maybe some right here. But I'm also being pulled to put something right here. Yeah, I'm gonna do some mini poppies. I'm gonna do some poppies right here at the bottom. And keeping in mind your grouping. So I have a little group of poppies right here, 1, 2, 3. I am feeling like I want to do some right here. I'm just even just touching the corner of the piece. 1, 2, 3, 4. I do kind of want to put something right here. I'm going in with my black now, my centers. Over here. And I'm going to go in and add just some wispies of the eucalyptus. Just a wash because I don't want it to be the main focus. I'll add a wispy right here. Okay, I'm pretty happy with this. I don't really want to do much else. I think I'm done. I really like this. I think it looks really pretty. Okay, cool.